morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. My name is Frank Vanderam. I have the pleasure of being the host for our Maximo webcast today. Our topic today is Maximo's Operator's Log application. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's webcast. I truly hope you find the content both informative and valuable to your organization. For those of you who are new to OnTrack's Maximo webcast series, we offer one educational webcast each month on a topic of interest, typically suggested by our clients or past webcast attendees. The purpose is simply to provide some insight into the capabilities of Maximo. This can be a very specific function or perhaps a more broader topic. If you have any suggestions for future webcasts, please feel free to email them to us at webcasts@ontracksconsulting.com. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Craig McKenzie. Please stand by. I will now mute the phone lines, and I'll hand this call over to Craig.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. Thanks once again. This is Craig McKenzie speaking now. I'm just going to flip over to my presentation and start with the presented material. Before we get into it, just in terms of a background, I'm a principal consultant with OnTracks Consulting. I have about 16 years of Maximo implementation experience, and most of that experience is with the Maximo Oil and Gas Industry Solution, the Maximo Health Safety Environment Manager add-on, Maximo Utilities, Transportation, and Spatial. And I put that last bullet because I really do love the HSE and oil and gas functionality that's in Maximo, and I spend a lot of my time these days focused on projects that are kind of surrounding some of those applications, whether they're management of change, incident management, operator logs. It takes kind of that core Maximo functionality and extends it into different areas inside of an organization where you can still leverage one common platform. In terms of the agenda for the session today, what I'm going to do is I'll talk a little bit about the need for operator shift logging capabilities, a little bit about shift change and turnover. I'm going to probably use some terms interchangeably or inconsistently. There's a lot of different terminology for what I think is basically the same thing. Shift change, turnover, changeover, handover. Your organization may use some of those words to describe kind of the shift-to-shift communication that would occur inside of a control room. So forgive me if I kind of switch back and forth. They all basically mean the same. I've looked at a lot of the regulatory body write-ups on control room management, and frankly, even those folks kind of flip-flop a little bit between some of the terms, but basically they're all the same. I'm going to talk specifically about the operator logs application that exists inside of Maximo, where to find it, where to get it if you don't currently have it. I'll summarize some of the functionality of that application, and then I'll move into a demonstration so you guys can kind of see it live in action. So I guess first off, what is operator logging or shift communications? It's an official record of shift activities that are performed within a control room or when operating or controlling or monitoring a pipeline, a facility, or a plant, right? So these activities have been around for a long time. Ever since we've had control rooms, there's been some mechanism of kind of communicating to the next person on shift what's occurred. But traditionally, this has been logged in a shift log booklet, and some of your facilities may still have some of these shift log booklets. It's simply there's usually like a little brown booklet or black booklet or big chief tablet or what have you, where someone kind of writes down throughout the shift all the notable events, communications, and so forth, and then takes that information and carries it to the next operator or controller as they join the next oncoming shift. There's several regulatory bodies that require control room logging as part of their control room management sections, and I've listed some here, but there's far more than what you see. I mean, PHMSA is a big federal one, obviously, ABSA, DOT, several state corporation commissions, Texas Railroad Commission. There's a bunch of different regulating bodies that require companies that require them to perform shift logging and shift-to-shift handovers to ensure or help, I guess, mitigate any incidents that occur inside of a facility that has, high-risk products. So I guess maybe first off, why is this so important? Why is logging so important to companies? Why do these regulatory bodies create these standards? And it comes down to really one simple thing: risk mitigation. And maybe to best illustrate some of that risk, there's been some major incidents that involved operator logging. Now, it doesn't mean that these incidents were the root cause was, poor operator logs, but in the write-ups from the analysis that was performed of these incidents, I've listed a few here where they've specifically noted operator logging in that analysis. So the Texas City refinery explosion, which was obviously a horrible incident, there was a miscommunication in that one. There was an operator who had logged that a unit was filled, but they didn't log that the exchanger in another tank was filled. And that, had some downstream effects that, led to one of the many reasons that explosion occurred. 9 Mile Point nuclear plant, they had some major pump issues, and a lot of folks were aware of it, but they weren't logging it in the control room log. The controllers were aware of it, but it wasn't logged. And that particular facility management was reviewing logs as part of a normal process, but it didn't make it onto the log. And had it made onto the log, maybe management would have noticed it, maybe it would have been elevated, and maybe it could have been prevented. The Bruce nuclear power plant, this one's a bit different, where an operator actually did note a problem with the piece of equipment in their operator logbook. So they actually did exactly what they should have. But what happened is it was never inspected. So although they actually put in a note and put in a comment and identified that there was an issue, there was really nothing actionable from it. And what I'll talk about as we get into the operator logs demonstration is obviously logging is important, but also connecting some of that to the work that needs to be performed is equal or more important. I mean, if you identify a problem, you'd probably like to create a work order to have that problem, actioned in the field or actioned by a specific technician. Okay, so simply put, operator logging is so important because it's going to minimize the risk of incidents. It's going to make your facility safer. So the Maximo operator log application itself, what is it? It's an integrated log application. So it's part of the same technology stack of Maximo, and it can be used by controllers, operators, or I guess frankly anybody depending on how you set up your security. But one thing I want to point out is you find this application in really one of two places. There's, of course, base Maximo, which probably most of you have, if not all on this call, which gives you the standard functionality that comes with Maximo. And I mean, there's tons and tons of applications in there for work management, procurement, and inventory. But then there's two additional components you can get. One is the Maximo for health, safety, and environment add-on solution, and one is Maximo for oil and gas. Now, frankly, they're almost identical when you look at them, other than the application name changes. But these two solutions provide you with additional applications and functionality that are specific to managing health, safety, and environment issues and specific to managing issues that the oil and gas industry faces. So if you don't have that or want it, you can also purchase some of the components separately. And I say purchase, it's more like license separately. So if you're someone who says, well, hey, I really want operator logging, but I don't really want all of the other components that come with HSE, there are some options available to you, and I'd be happy to help you out. Just contact me for more details. I'll put my contact information at the end of the presentation. But you do need one of those two, either Maximo for HSE and Maximo for oil and gas, from version 7.1 forward to be able to access the operator logs application. So I guess maybe probably a pretty important question is, why should you use Maximo for logging? I mean, there's some folks out there that are probably using SharePoint, maybe Excel, maybe a Word document, maybe that paper booklet I talked about. Why would you want to use Maximo for logging? A couple of things. One, it provides a fully auditable record for regulators and internal audits. Obviously, it's a database. Presumably it's backed up. You can set up all sorts of great security functionality around it, so it becomes a fully auditable record. Probably more important is the second bullet here. It's already integrated. If you use Maximo today for work management, you probably already have in Maximo your list of assets, your pumps, your motors, your compressors, what have you. Already have your locations, whether they're town codes for a utility company, whether they're P&ID or tag numbers for an oil and gas facility, or pipeline segments for a pipeline company. You already have that information. You've built a solid location hierarchy that you can leverage with operator logging. So if people are making a log comment, and I'll demonstrate some of this later, they can reference those assets and locations and tie it all together. That way, when someone pulls up the history of an asset or the history of a location, they're going to get complete history, not just work history. They could see operational type notes. It's integrating with your shift communications, and I'll demonstrate that. You can launch an email from within the application, send an email to someone, which is maybe a better means of communication for some folks in your company, but it still tracks that email, stores the contents of the email, and again, that becomes part of this auditable record. And it's also integrated with work orders, which is a big component of this. Often as a result of, a control or monitoring, a system, a facility, a pipeline, we identify that some corrective work is required, and typically in companies that use Maximo, a work order is the mechanism to have that work performed. And of course, people and labor, you probably maintain those records already in the system. So essentially what this is saying is rather than creating a brand new data island and going out and getting a operator log application or building your own, this is already integrated with these components, so you can leverage that data that's already there. And then the last bullet, if you use Maximo today, you're already supporting Maximo. So you have servers, you probably have a team of folks in your IT department, your help desk, what have you, that are knowledgeable on the application, that can probably configure the application, that support the application. So it's not standing up a whole new environment, it's not learning a new application, it's something that you already have. So with that, I'm going to focus a little more on the demonstration now, which is probably of more interest to most of you. What I'm going to cover in the demonstration, just kind of list it out. I'm going to create a brand new shift, and I'll make some log comments just to show you how some of that functionality flows. I'm going to show you how you can track shift teams. I think depending on the regulatory body that may be governing some of your control room management policies, there's sometimes hour of service type obligations that you might want to track who was on shift, maybe when they arrived, maybe when they left, so that you're making sure that folks aren't working too much and they're not exposed to any fatigue type risks. So you can obviously track some of that shift team, and I'll talk to that. Performing communications, and that's primarily in the form of email. So if you wanted to send an email from a log, because maybe that's a better means to connect with maybe someone in a group that doesn't use Maximo regularly, I'll show you how you can do that and make that part of the audited record. I'll cover some of the downtime and meter recording. Sometimes, people in the control room, operators, they have access to a lot of good equipment information that, it makes sometimes a lot of sense to get that information directly from them. So maybe if you're tracking pressure, temperature, vibration, whatever it might be, or even things like just run hours, and you want to leverage those in Maximo, well, they can enter them directly from their control room logging application. They don't have to, go to the asset screen, find an asset, enter the meter, and I'll demonstrate that. You can create service requests or work orders depending on what your current process is, and then track those against the log. And then you can also manage shift handovers, changeovers, whatever you call it. That whole process of, a shift ends or is coming to an end. Typically, the outgoing operator is going to spend time with the incoming operator. They're going to go through the event details during their shift, any major changes, maybe how the facility plant pipeline is currently operating, maybe shipments, all sorts of different things that are occurring, and just talk to either how you can use it out of the box, Maximo, to manage that, or even some of the common configurations that folks are using to manage that piece. And then last, operator logs has a pretty cool functionality in there around templating. So if if you have a day shift and a night shift, and they're on a very common rotation, there's some tools in here that kind of expedite the process of saying, hey, I'm part of this shift, and rather than having to enter all the time, this is the console I work on, or the location, or the people on shift, you can kind of template that and reuse it. So I'll demonstrate all of these components here in a second. So just allow me, I'm just going to flip over to Maximo. I'll open that up, and then we'll step through those components. And with any luck, you should be seeing a welcome to Maximo login screen. I think this is 7505 that I'm working on here. Maximo 7.6 is compatible with oil and gas, as well as, like I said, everything after 7.1.1, I think oil and gas will have the operator log application. I'm just going to log in as this is Mr. Wilson. And it's going to open up to Mike Wilson's Start Center. And this is just kind of a demo environment. I didn't really configure the Start Center specifically for operator logs. In fact, I've seen on a lot of projects, there's a functionality in here to just launch directly to an application. And I've seen that some folks are using that functionality for controllers, right? Like rather than going to a Start Center, maybe that's not relevant, it just launches directly to the operator log application. So you can do that as well. In terms of where this application sits, I mentioned it's part of either the HSE or the oil and gas solution, depending on which one you may have, or if you don't have either, you wouldn't see some of this. I'm currently running oil and gas in here, and again, they're ostensibly the same. The application names are a little bit different, but the underlying data and tables are the same. And it sits inside of a module called operations. So in that operations module, you're going to see a few different applications, and the one I'm focusing on for this particular demonstration is that top one, operator logs. So the operator logs application itself, it groups all of the log comments into shifts, which is typically what people are looking for, so that they can go back and say, hey, I want to see last shift or 5 shifts ago, or God forbid there's an incident, they would be able to do an investigation based on the last number of shifts and see what occurred specifically shift by shift. So what I'm going to start by doing is just creating a brand new record, and then we can kind of step through the different fields, functionality along the way. I'm going to hit the new button. One of the first things you'll notice, there's a few required fields here. The shift log, start date, finish date. Again, you probably would want to configure some of these things depending on your current process. The shift log ID, this may be just an auto number. I've seen people do a lot of smart numbers where maybe they put in the date, have that kind of default. So for example, I could go 0206 because it's February the 6th, 15-01 to make a unique record. Again, you wouldn't want people probably typing this in because you'd get a bunch of inconsistent log IDs. So typically you'd set up an auto number format that works for your company, and it would do this automatically for you. There's a general description field here if you wanted to describe it, something you could just put day shift. You could remove the field entirely if it's of no value to your company. It's entirely up to you in terms of your process. There's a start date and finish date, and this is typically where you're going to say the start of the shift and the end of the shift, right? So if I wanted to come in here and say, the shift was last night to tonight, and you could even adjust the times if you'd like to make it very specific to say, hey, it was a 5 to 5 shift or 7 to 7 or whatever your shift schedules may be, so that you can track when the shift started and when the shift finished. I've also seen some configurations around handover that when the last shift is handed over, it sets some of these dates, so you can have an exact time based on when shift handover or shift changeover was completed. There's a period field here. This is just a demo data set. It shows 12 hours, 8 hours. I've seen different options there. You may choose to do day shift, night shift, mid shift. I think there's a lot of instances where maybe a controller gets sick during shift. They have to go home. You would do, I think, as part of a lot of the regulatory requirements, you would do a shift handover. So in that instance, you might have a mid-shift shift handover. It wasn't at the end of shift. So you can configure these drop-downs to whatever you'd like. I'm just going to stick with the demo data, and I'll pick just 12 hours for now. And then there's a bunch of fields here in the kind of detail section, and IBM's done a good job of giving you a lot of options here. And I think what I typically find is you would look at these and probably define, based on your process, which of these fields you'd like to keep here, which ones you'd remove, and you can just use the application designer screen to make those changes. Or if you need to add additional fields, you can do so here as well. So they've kind of put them all here, and then it's you're going to pick and choose the ones that you want. So there's a reference here. Maybe you have a reference ID, some type of number that you would want to reference the shift to. You could identify the supervisor on shift. If you had a specific supervisor and you wanted to say that, in this case I'm going to pick Warren Gates is the supervisor on shift, maybe we need that as part of our historical records. And then there's some other fields here that are going to define what you're tying the shift to, right? So you might say, hey, this shift is tied to, like I'm controlling a certain plant or a certain facility or a certain pipeline. And this is where you can leverage your existing location hierarchy. So I may come in here and say this particular shift log is controlling this plant, right? So I just picked, again, from my demo data set, a plant that sits in there. You could even say it's for a specific asset if that makes sense, if you're controlling a large asset, a group of assets or an asset list, or even a work order, like maybe it's related to a large turnover work order or something, you could identify that you're monitoring that. Again, I most commonly see location here being used, but you would pick and choose the ones that make sense for your business. There's a control room drop down here where you can identify a specific control room. Some people refer to them as consoles, really defining what you're controlling. And again, these fields would be, updated to reflect your business, your facilities, your control rooms. The demo data set just has, field, utilities control room, central, control room. I'm just going to pick one of those. There's a comments box here. This is maybe some general comments related to the shift. I can say, line 101 is down, white tail facility. is offline. You may put some general comments in there that you just want to communicate to the next controller that aren't specifically related to logs. And again, it's up to you how you want to use some of these fields. And you can even go so far as to classify and subclassify your logs. You can identify plant modes. Is it operational? Are we currently in turnaround? Is the facility in a standby position? You can kind of identify that. Again, kind of a la carte, pick and choose the ones that make sense to you, probably remove the ones that don't, add the ones that aren't there that you need, and then what you'll do is you'll create a header, which is this details section, that should be filled out at the start of the shift. So if I'm working and controlling for a 12-hour shift, I do what I just did, I do my start time, end time, whatever those details are, and then I would probably save my record. And at that point, I move away from setting up my shift and focus more on my log entry. Now, before I get there, I'll show you that there is a shift team tab here. And what I can do there is I can identify the folks that are on shift. So some people have requirements on, hey, if there's 5 or 6 folks in that control room, we need to identify who they are, when they arrived, all that kind of stuff. And again, you can pick from your list. I can say, yeah, there was a few folks that were in the control room at that time, and that becomes part of our historical auditable record. Pick those people. I've often seen if you want to put a start time, end time, if you want to track that in Maximo for things like hours of service, you can do that here as well, entirely up to your process. So again, once the shift has been set up, typically the controller, operator, the person monitoring the facility is going to transition from setting up the shift to logging, right? So they kind of save it. Now they focus on, their logging activities, they're monitoring, they're looking at alarms, they're changing movements, they're doing all sorts of stuff. What's going to happen, of course, during that shift is there's going to be some type of an event. And the event doesn't need to be critical in nature. It could be a communication, could be an outage, could be a problem, could be something changing. So they're going to come and they're going to log it. That's part of the regulatory requirements for a lot of facilities. So I'm going to just go new row. And this is where they would create their many logs throughout the shift. They'd simply hit new row every time. They can track what the log entry is tied to. So they could tie it to a specific asset or a location. I could say it's going to BR 400, which is the main boiler. I can put a summary in here and say temperature is high. I can even put a bunch of details, right? So I can then go in to say that, my specific alarm tag of this showed the temperature of that, which is outside of the range. I won't bore you guys with my typing, but you can enter all of those in that detail, and of course that information becomes queryable and of course saved in the database. There's some other fields that you could fill in. You can make required depending on what you'd like. There's a log date. That's tracking the date and time that I performed that log. But there's also an event date here. And the event date, what often I think happens is, you get a flood of alarms or there's an emergency of some type. It's going to take a while to probably address the emergency or these alarms before you're going to go back and log it. I mean, often what I see is there's kind of a scratch pad. The controller or operator writes stuff down, and then later when they have time, they're going to come back and then start putting it into the official log, which is, of course, in this case, Maximo, but they would want to backdate it from the log date to say, hey, the event actually occurred today, but it didn't occur. It occurred a little bit earlier. It was actually at 11 a.m., not 12:50 a.m. Okay. There's also different log types, and you can pick and choose what those log types are. I've seen all sorts of different things. They can be some type of summary, some type of note, some type of communication or phone call. You might put some type of communication failure. There's a variety of different log types. Your company probably would want to group the different entries into different categories, and this is where you could make that field required and pick and choose which log type you'd like to pick from. Okay. And then simply, the next event comes in, they hit new row. Same thing. You can tie it to an asset if you prefer. You could tie it to neither. It's entirely up to your business process. And then I would say low pressure alarm on pump. I could hit new row, and again, it's just that simple. I can just keep hitting new row, and then I can come in here and say, well, it's not really related to either, but I had a communication failure at a certain facility. And throughout the shift, you just continuously add these log entries, right? And then, of course, this is going to become that official record at the end of it. So I'm just going to save my record, and there are a bunch of security features you can, play with a little bit depending on what you'd like. When I save it right now, it's going to make all of these required. In most cases, you're not going to want people to be editing log entries after the fact. Obviously, just you want an official record, and the best way to maintain that record is to have them locked down, but you can kind of pick and choose. There is the ability to modify them if you'd like, depending, again, on security settings. You can modify or delete logs, but again, this is up to your business process to define whether people can save, or when they save them, if they're read-only or they can be edited or what have you. I want to touch on a few of the items under the Select Action menu. So again, in addition to just logging, there's some other functionality that might be beneficial in here. So for example, there's a Create. And next to Create, out of the box, it shows service requests. A lot of our clients, they don't maybe use service requests directly. They may go straight to a work order. We've added that in there. But it's the same functionality, and I'll show you that. So if I go, hey, I want to create a service request or a work order as an operator, it's going to pop up this nice little dialog. I'm going to come in and go, yeah, it's for this asset or location. Again, you can leverage your hierarchy. And I can go, check the low pressure on P101, put some details in there saying, the alarm shows low output pressure. When I hit OK, what it's going to do is it's going to create, again, you can do it with a work order or a service request, it's going to go and create a service request. And that's going to take it into whatever your normal flow is, your normal workflow process or business process for managing those records. But inside the log, if I go to related records here, you're going to see that it's tied that ticket, in this case I created a service request, to my operator log. So again, if you created a bunch of work orders or tickets, it's going to show you that complete picture of what occurred. And of course, you can see the statuses, so you can take a look throughout the day. Has it been acknowledged? Has it been worked? Is it in progress? Is it completed? Again, depending on your workflow, you can make sure that these records are being actioned. You can also even just select records. Someone may call up and say, hey, I'm out at this station and I'm about to do this work. I'd like you to know, be aware of that. I'm going to be shutting off some equipment. You may want to come in here and go, okay, well, what work order are you on? You can click the select work orders and say, okay, give me your number. You could type that in, pick the work order, one or many. And again, it's going to tie that work order now to this log. So that, again, when you make maybe a note to indicate that, some equipment's being shut off by, a person in the field, you also have that related work order linked up to this operator log. So the goal is to really create a complete picture of what happened during that shift. Some other items that are in that Select Action menu, you're going to see a Create Incident. So as part of the HSC and oil and gas solutions, you get access to incidents and defects. So same thing, if there was an incident, you had to flare off something, you had to, whatever the incident may be, you could create an incident, and similar to the service request, it's going to attach that as a related record. Same thing with defects and even communications. Now, communications are a bit different. What this does is create an email. So what may happen is, you want to send an email to someone. It's, the middle of the night. You're not going to obviously phone them up, but you need something done in the morning. You need someone to go check something out. You may go communication, create a communication, type in your email, put in my email address. You could pick it from the list there as well. You could, say, go check out facility, whatever it is, put in all your great details, use the rich text editor, even attach a picture, maybe of the alarm screen or the HMI or whatever it might be, and then hit send. I'm not actually hooked up to an email server on my VM here, but when you hit send, it would simply, and this is normal Maximo functionality, it's going to create an email, send it through your SMTP server. Person gets it as a normal email, which is perfect, so they don't have to log into Maximo or anything like that. And then on the Shift Communications tab, all of those emails that are sent using this method throughout the shift are tracked here. So you can see, hey, I did in fact send an email to that person at that date and time. Again, it creates a very complete picture of what happened during shift. Okay. There's a couple other things. I'll talk about templating in a few minutes. Entering meter readings is a great one. Sometimes your operators or folks in the control room have access to data that maybe the folks in the field don't easily have access to. So you might want to come in, and maybe it's part of the process to periodically update some meter readings that may update preventive maintenance. So for example, if you wanted to generate PMs based on run hours rather than a time-based schedule, maybe you, as part of the process, sometime during the shift, you get the operators to update some of those based on what they can see in their control systems or their plant historian or what have you. So just to show you whatever those readings may be, I'll just pick a particular asset, and what it shows me is for that asset, this one has a pressure reading and a run hour reading, right? So I can come in here and see the last reading on pressure was 4473. I just looked at my screen and my new pressure is 4400. And run hours went from 5471. It's actually up to 5500 run hours as of right now. And if I hit OK, it goes ahead. Oh, I have to fill in the sector and all my other great information. And it's going to go ahead and create an entry for those meters. So, and again, you could probably default some of this if that makes more sense. But it goes ahead and along the top says meter readings have been saved. So it went and updated the readings. So again, if you had maybe a condition monitoring point that said if the pressure goes below a certain point or above a certain point, and now maybe you're outside of your manufacturer operating pressures, or maximum operating pressures, it may create a work order automatically using the Maximo tool, or run hour is a perfect example if you just have some meter-based PMs that you want to kick off. Again, maybe some of the folks in the control room have better access to that. There's obviously you can build reports just like any other application. You can duplicate logs just like any other application. You can modify, delete logs. I already talked about that a little bit. There's some other tabs along the top here as required. I've already touched on the related records, shift communications, but the production loss one here is good as well. If you want to track details related to benefits and losses, you can do so here. So you can just create a new loss reference, which is a separate application. There's a benefits and losses application that exists in Maximo. I'm not going to spend a ton of time. It's almost its own webcast, but in here you can identify, the impacts for the benefits. You can identify the losses. So, for example, if you had a loss today, or benefit or something like that, and you want to track, what specifically the loss quantities, the units that you lost, or what have you, you can track all of that back to the operator log records. You can also simplify this too. I've seen some people say, well, maybe that's a little too heavy, but we'll just track things like downtime, right, or up-down status on some of our key pieces of equipment. So you can do that here as well. I'll talk a little bit about templates and then maybe Handover. The templating functionality is kind of cool. Inside of Maximo operator logs, there's a templates under select action, and then there's three options: generate, edit, and apply. So if I click generate, what it's going to do is it's going to pull from this operator log record. So I already identified a supervisor with Mr. Gates. Here's a shift reference ID. I put in some fields, and you can even add additional fields in here. And then I've identified the team members that are part of this shift. If I hit OK, it's going to create a brand new template, right? And this one's going to be called 1003. But if I hit OK, and what this allows me to do is on the next shift, if I want to just not have to enter all that information over and over again, it's going to just apply it. So I'll just show you that quickly. If I created a brand new shift, I'll give it another number. I'll just make up a number. Again, you'd probably auto-number that. I'll put in a date. Put in a date range in there, save my record, and under select action, I can go template, apply. Now what this is going to show me is all the different templates that I've created, right? So maybe you have a day shift, you have a night shift, you have shift A, B, C, however you identify them. But if I wanted to apply that same shift, I just highlight that record, hit OK, and what it did is it filled in my reference, my supervisor, my store, or my control room, plant mode, and then on the shift team, filled in the people that are part of that shift. And again, you can even extend that if you want more than just those fields. Maybe you populate the plant. Maybe you populate some of these other fields if you'd like. So it gives you a really quick way to come in here, grab a shift that's kind of off the shelf, say apply it to my operator log record, and it pulls in all of this information for you. The only other item I had on my list to discuss was kind of the shift handover, changeover, turnover, shift change, whatever you want to call it, process. So obviously there's the process of creating these logs throughout the shift. That creates the details behind what happened during a given shift. And I'll just maybe go back to my one. I had a bit more information in there. And what often happens, as I mentioned, is there's typically, well, I think in most cases it's required, there's a handover period that occurs during shift. So the outgoing operator is going to spend time with the incoming operator. They're going to sit down together, talk through what they're worked on. So they probably go down this list and say, hey, here's some of the log entries that I've identified. Make sure the other person's up to speed. Sometimes this list can get pretty lengthy. I mean, depending on the level of granularity that your control room tracks information, maybe every phone call, maybe every communication gets in there. Sometimes there's 100, 200 log entries in a particular shift. So you can do things like, maybe check off which ones are required for handover. I've seen people adding like a separate tab that when they click on that tab, it only shows the ones that you want to show during handover. So, by putting a simple checkbox saying, include in handover, you would be able to check off the ones that you want in a shift handover, and then you have another tab that the operators would go through that doesn't cover some of the nuisance type information that you still wanted to capture, but it's not really critical for the oncoming shift operator. Maybe if you got a phone call from someone and you did something, it's not actionable, it's not really important, it wasn't an incident, you would be able to just kind of show them there. And then obviously workflow, if you're familiar with that inside of Maximo, this is sitting in a status of draft. You can leverage the Maximo workflow engine to have the oncoming or incoming operator or controller review the shift, change the status, accept it, and then you get all of that great history of who created it, when was it accepted, when did the outgoing operator leave, when did the incoming operator leave. So you could build a simple workflow process to manage that shift handover so that, again, God forbid an incident occurs, you could actually go back and prove that the information was communicated from shift to shift. And then the searching of these is, no different than most of the other Maximo applications. You can search through the list tab. There's an advanced search, which allows you to maybe search just log entries. Maybe you want to search for keyword or a specific asset, or maybe you want to search for, benefits or losses or time frames. And again, all of this can be configured as well. If there's fields that you wanted to add that you want searchable, you can use the application designer screen in Maximo to further configure that. So with that, I think I got a couple more minutes from the scheduled 40 minutes, but we can certainly go beyond that. I'll open the call up to some questions. Turn it over here to Frank, and Frank can kind of go through the closing. And what we'll do is that we typically post these recordings, so they'll be available if you want to pass them out to other folks inside of your organization.
All right. This concludes today's webcast, everybody. I would like to thank all of you who attended today. We trust you found the webcast of interest and value to your organization. If you'd like to get a copy of the presented PowerPoint, please feel free to send an email to Craig directly using his contact information on the screen. At this time, I will be closing both the teleconference line and the online meeting center. Again, thank you for your time and interest, and we look forward to meeting you again.